Service Learning students, as promised, here is the discussion of model examples and work from students in previous semesters. So if you go to the Unit 2 area and look under Resources, you'll see we can open up the overview, and I've asked you all to look very closely at the project proposal guidelines, which you are workshopping in today's lessons. And what I'm going to do is this is the handout that sort of gives an overview of everything you need to do. I'm going to show you some student examples from previous semesters to sort of show you how they successfully negotiated all these details and put them into sort of final reports, which you're going to turn your draft proposal in on next Monday, and then the final report is due the following Monday. So if we back up a little bit here and look at the student samples, you'll see that there are listed here both project proposals and final projects. And what you'll see is the proposals and the projects are both the same from the same students, so that you can sort of track and see how the students are doing in their early proposal form and how those projects finally wind up in their final projects. And one of the things I tried to emphasize in the screencasts that I posted with the handout that you should have looked at in the last lesson is that part of a 100 level first year inquiry course is that you're going to try and sort of take a project forward and make a lot of mistakes along the way, and what you do in your proposal and where you wind up with your final project are usually quite a ways apart, and that's where the learning takes place. So in your proposal you get to outline what you would like to do. Your final project at the end of the course, you do a review and a reflection on what worked and what didn't work and what you learned in the process. So in this proposal phase, you can see how the students initially imagine their projects, and then in the final projects you can look at their reports and see how they sort of wound up. These were successful projects the last couple of summers. These were all from the summer course, the online course. The first one I'll click on here is from my student Peace, who was in North Carolina, and he initiated in this proposal. You can see he had a very ambitious project. It was about helping work with he was already doing community service work, but he decided to focus on this food bank in this housing project in Durham, North Carolina. And you can read through the document what his ideas were, what he wanted to do. You'll see how he really, in a nice way, goes through and does his background and skills inventory in part 1, gives some background on who he is, the inquiry element in part 2, where he really tries to hone in on some of the national issues at the time with food insecurity and some of the particular issues nationwide from the sources that he brought into his proposal, but then also the specific things going on in that local community. Very nice mix of specific national statistics and local statistics, and he makes a strong case for why his project would be useful towards addressing a specific need in his community, and also where it would fit the inquiry element of what he could do. We don't just want to go and give trays to people in a food bank or something like that, or distribute the food. We want to do something that also allows us to achieve the goals of this course, which has to do with problem solving and inquiry. And so as you can see in his proposal, he does a really good job of outlining how he's going to sort of meet each of those areas. He has a very specific plan of action. The community partnership, this is very important that you choose a community partner. You can't just do this on your own. So you see a whole list of community partners there. This is a requirement for the project. He makes a cogent argument for why he thinks this is a particularly good use of his time. He has a very specific timeline. He completes the ALPS inventory, which comes from your book, at the end. It's very thorough. He has a very thorough bibliography at the end with resources that are both local and national. So a very effective proposal. And what I can tell you about this, if you look at this initial proposal, and then if you back up and then look at the final project, what was interesting with this is a perfect example of FYI at work, was that Peace encountered in the time when he was doing this food project, there was a local issue with police shootings, which has become a national debate. And so, as per the instructions that I gave you last week, he was thinking on his toes, and part of the food insecurity and food bank project shifted towards this community project where they tried to facilitate some dialogue and some work with the local law enforcement and have a community get together and address issues and concern. So that all wound up in his final report. That is something he never would have anticipated in his proposal. In his final report, he explains how some of that element came into play. And in this, the final report, you can see by the time he finished the project, he had all these nice handouts, pictures, images, people in the community that were being helped. So if you're thinking ahead with your proposal, and if you choose your project in a way that is effective, you can wind up with a really nice report at the end, something you'd be proud to put on your resume. And so that's a good example of a very ambitious project that went successfully. Another one from a student, I believe in that same semester, that same summer, working in San Francisco, identified an issue with food deserts in the city there, where there was a lot of fast food, there was a lot of convenience store food, but there wasn't a lot of fresh food or nutritious food. So she helped in working with community partners there in setting up some local gardens and also establishing a food bank. And you can read all about her proposal in this section. Very ambitious proposal. This was one of the better projects that we've had. I think actually this is the final report. The proposal really outlines where she was hoping to go with it, and as you can see, because she planned it well at the proposal stage, that student was able to really have a very effective final report. We had a student last summer or the summer before who was in a more regional area, was in Omaha, and was doing a mentorship program through the Summer Soccer League, and you can see how she set up her proposal there. And notice one thing these all have in common: lots of details, lots of outside sources, clear community partners, clear plans of action, very specific proposals, timelines. These are the ones that tend to be the most successful. And then finally, we had a student who was in San Antonio a couple summers ago, and she wanted to do she wanted to partner with her local homeless shelter, and so she did her work in that arena. Now, what I want to say about all of these proposals, and as you're thinking about projects at this point, number one, community partners. You can't do this on your own. So if Christina had wanted to just go volunteer at the local homeless shelter, as you're reading in the book and as you read in the handout, that's not really service learning. That's service. So she was pressured. I prompted her from her proposal to really think of what she could bring to this project that was new and unique, and if there's a specific thing she could do to make it more of an inquiry project, so it's not just going and doing the service or doing the labor, but actually helping to construct a project and do something that involves service learning. So here are some examples from last summer. I had a student who lived near North Platte in the community of Hershey, Nebraska, who was a non-traditional student at Chatham State College. She was older, but she was also a part-time teacher at Mid-Plains Community College in North Platte, and she did adult education classes, and she decided to set up an adult education class for people in her community of Hershey, Nebraska, who are older adults who maybe don't know how to use social media, Facebook, computer skills and that sort of thing. So she had a very targeted approach, and she could solve a very specific problem in the community that she tried to articulate. So it was a specific service project there, not just something that she was already doing. There was a proposal to help with Florida student in Florida, helping with the local food banks. There was a proposal from a student who wanted to help refurbish this was already being done in the community of North Platte. There was this Fox Theater downtown. They were refurbishing it and trying to make it into more of a community playhouse. So there's a lot of volunteer efforts and work to be done there. A challenge to him as well was, I said, you can't just go and volunteer necessarily and sweep the floors. What can you do to add to the sort of fundraising? What can you do to address a specific issue that's more inquiry driven? And so he did a reflection and work on that and tried to build a service project around there. There were a couple of other ones. There was a student who volunteered for a domestic abuse shelter. There were a couple of students who worked in the arena of addiction management or drug abuse. One student in Arizona volunteered at a methadone clinic. One was a track athlete, a CSC track athlete, who was helping to coach in a community somewhere on the East Coast. And what he was doing was he was volunteering to give advice to student athletes who were getting ready to finish their student careers and whether they would be going on into the pros or not, pro athletics. And his whole point was that many people who come out of the pros are not very well equipped to take up other work or other professions, and so he really did a series of talks around this sort of thing. That was his service project. So let me finish up by talking about one very specific example. This had to do with a couple of proposals I had last summer from students who wanted to do work with the Humane Society or local animal shelters. And so one student was in Scottsbluff, and so this is an example of where we're at right now. She knew that she wanted to do something with animals with the animal shelter. She was already volunteering at the Humane Society and the animal shelter. Great. So in her proposal, she said, I want to continue doing this volunteer work. And I said, okay, good, but that is not a service learning project. What is the inquiry element? What is the service component? So what we came up with was, in her proposal, was to continue to do her volunteer work for the shelter, but then she came up with a plan of action that involved fundraising and raising public awareness about the needs of this shelter. And so additional service hours were put together where she set up booths outside Walmart and one of the local convenience stores with information about the shelter and fundraising, and she raised money for the shelter. So that's an example of where she was asked to identify specific needs where they needed help. One of the areas where they really did need a lot of help was not necessarily in the day-to-day taking care of the animals, although that was important, but was there weren't enough people adopting pets. So her inquiry element was, okay, that's the problem I've identified. What are the national sort of proposals for how to fix this? What can I do locally? And she came up with this thing of setting up these booths, including images of the animals, talking about what it's like to do pet adoption, just making it much more visible. And so that's an example of translating an idea into an actual proposal. So I hope that you have gleaned something from these student examples that are posted there for you to see. These are examples of successful proposals. You can model your proposals and eventually your final projects on these. You'll be in really good shape. So, good luck going forward. Contact me if you have any questions.